as well as the provinces of Canada. Our presenter today is Andrew Johnson. Andy graduated with a master's degree in accounting with an emphasis in taxation from Brigham Young University. He began his career in state taxation with Arthur Anderson. After 4 years there, he partnered with Jerry Peisner, and in 1992, they founded Peisner Johnson and Company. Andy and his family live on a working cattle ranch south of Dallas. He's active in church and community affairs. He's on the executive board of the Circle 10 Council of the Boy Scouts of America. He's also the president of the Milford High School Booster Club. Andy's an experienced professional in state and local tax matters. He's consulted hundreds of companies in all kinds of industries across the country. Andy's also a member of the AICPA and the Texas Society of CPAs. So with that, I will pass the mic to Andy. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Ashley, and thank you for that introduction, and welcome to all of you in attendance today. I'm really excited for this opportunity to teach on this subject. I am coming to you live from Dallas, well, actually Waxahachie, Texas. It's a beautiful time to be in Texas. Chamber of Commerce weather today. It's a beautiful time to be a cattle rancher, and we have our fair of grasshoppers right now this time of year, but it's very pleasant. It's a fantastic time to be in Texas. I couldn't say that in July or August, or September for that matter, but here in October, it's a great time. All right, I'm going to get out of this webcam and proceed on with the webinar today. All right, yes, today's webinar is all about Nexus and the history of Nexus, how we got to the point where we are, and by the time, my goal of this presentation, both parts, and you won't be there until you've taken both parts, but my goal is that you can be very comfortable speaking to your clients, or if you're inside of a company, speaking to management about Nexus. My personal view, or kind of how I operate, is I can't stand not knowing and speaking hazily. That doesn't mean that we are going to be able to answer specifically every question about every Nexus activity. Once we're done, you're going to see why we can't answer those questions sometimes to the level that people would like, but you'll understand why. What I'm going to give you is a framework for evaluating Nexus and evaluating your client's Nexus footprint, that we call it. I do want to make some resources available to you right off the bat, because sometimes when people come to these webinars, what they're really looking for is a list of specific activities that they perform and whether or not those create Nexus and in what states. So what I have for you, and Ashley will post it in the chat section on your GoToMeeting control panel, is a list of 10 common Nexus creating activities. In other words, if you participate or conduct any of these activities in any state to any degree of significance, and we'll talk about that, then you're going to have Nexus. So sometimes that's all people need, is a list like this. And so we'll make those available right now. All right, so let's dive in. The first thing I want to do is start right in with a case study. And this is about a mattress retailer doing business headquartered in Oregon in this situation. Not a client of ours. I'm taking this information from a city business journal out of Portland, I believe. So it's out of publicly available information. This is Mattress World, and they are headquartered in Oregon. So Oregon has no sales tax. Maybe you knew that. So they're located in Oregon, and they're making deliveries across the border into Washington in this case. So they're making deliveries to customers in neighboring states. And so the question comes to you. Okay, you are their advisor. They come to you for advice on what they should do. And they say to you, um, we, um, we want to sell mattresses to customers in Washington. And it's a significant benefit if we don't have to charge them sales tax. So we want you to answer this question. Should we be collecting sales tax on our sales of mattresses in Washington? And do we owe Washington's B&O tax? Or, if you just make this about any state, should we be paying their state's income tax, for example? So if this were your client, how would you advise them? What would you need to know? So this gives us a chance to go into one of our first poll questions. So Ashley, back to you.
Okay, I have launched that poll. We'll give you a few seconds to answer those, or that one question. That's just about everybody, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I will share those results as kind of a getting to know you exercise.
Okay, very good. So interesting distribution, almost a perfect bell curve there. So 46%, well, 77%, I'll do my addition real quick, are either not very comfortable or only somewhat comfortable. So my goal is by the time we're done here in the next two courses, that 99% of you will say you're totally comfortable analyzing a situation like this. So the question is, what other information do you need? So far, I've told you that they sell mattresses in Washington and they have customers in Washington. Is that enough that they would have to be collecting sales tax? And remember, anybody can answer, yes, you should collect sales tax. All right? Anybody can say that because they want to be totally conservative. But remember, this is your client, and they are, in their view, this is the only way that they can thrive in their business. And so they're asking you not for the easy answer. As we always said, well, way back at Arthur Anderson, they don't pay us for the easy answers. However, you don't want to give them the wrong answer. Okay? So in this case, what did they do? And I don't know if they asked their CPA question or not. That's not available in this newspaper article. But I just assume they did. And in this case, they decided not to get registered for sales tax purposes, and I assume for B&O tax purposes. In the newspaper article, I didn't really make it clear what taxes were at stake here. As far as the general public is concerned, it's whether or not it's B&O tax or sales tax, it's all taxes, right? So in this case, Washington audited them and assessed them, according to the article, more than $2 million in tax, penalty, and interest. All right, so this is a mattress retailer. You can imagine how devastating that would be to a small business like that. $2 million is that they may not make that. Maybe their total revenues might be $2 million, right? So yeah, this is a picture of the owner, and according to her testimony, the business could not pay those amounts and could not pay their other bills because of this assessment, and therefore the business closed their doors. 80 employees lost their jobs, and I assume that a CPA somewhere, bookkeeper, or accountant somewhere lost maybe a good client here. And of course, depending on what the advice that they were given, you can imagine that there's potential lawsuits here if their advisor gave them bad advice, trying to help them out, trying to give them, a way to not have to charge the sales tax and stay in business. So, this is a pretty devastating situation for all parties, including the advisor. But before we just shake our heads and say, man, they shouldn't have done that, they should have been paying the taxes, I have to ask you, was Washington even on solid ground in assessing this tax? Was this assessment even valid? And I always wonder, without knowing the details, did somebody really work on that assessment? It's possible it was just an estimation. States are known to do that. You don't have enough records, then they just estimate it. And if you don't respond in a timely fashion, then you get stuck with it. But a bigger question, and this is where we come down to this whole issue of Nexus, is since when? All right, you've got an Oregon business that is resident in Oregon. Since when can Washington or any other state force another business, a in-state business, out-of-state business, force them to collect their tax? Why can't Washington collect its own tax? Why do they have to require another business to collect the tax? And that's really the bigger issue. That's the perspective that I would like us to have, at least for a little bit here. Try to put ourselves in the shoes of these small businesses or large businesses. Because the business argument, which I think we always have to keep in mind, because most of us run small businesses ourselves, the business argument is, wait a minute, it was the whole part of our founding that we should be able to pursue happiness. That's a basic right. There should not be taxation without representation. That's one of the main reasons we fought the Revolutionary War. Furthermore, this complying with all these different taxes in and of itself is too complicated and burdensome. And we're talking about somewhere between 10 and 13,000 taxing jurisdictions, each with their own rules, each with their own tax rates. So it's, to me, and I'm going to always be on the side of business probably, the business argument is very compelling. But I don't want to give you the idea that I think that the government has no argument. They do make an argument. And their argument is that it's really all about fundamental fairness, that everyone should have to pay their fair share. And the fact is that businesses, even out-of-state businesses, do use the services of that state in where they have customers. All right, maybe they don't use many services. They can't vote somebody out of office, but they do use some in-state services, maybe police protection. You might see a government make the argument that our very system of laws and enforcement of laws is the only way you could hope to do business in our state. So the business argument is compelling, but so is the government. All right. So how are these issues resolved? Well, it's the U.S. Constitution that controls here, because what we have here is sales between states. You have one state government trying to assess tax on an out-of-state resident. And so what the business does, the argument that the business will make is, well, what about my rights under the Due Process Clause? And the Due Process Clause in the U.S. Constitution basically says no person shall be deprived of their property without the due process of law, meaning if I can't vote you out of office, at least that's the way businesses would like to interpret this. If I can't vote you out of office, then I don't have sufficient due process of law before you force me to collect your tax. All right, so that's their argument under due process. And you might think, well, that's not so black and white there. That doesn't seem to me like automatic protection. So let me give you really their bigger argument. And it's what we refer to as the Commerce Clause. And when you study the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, you realize, and couple that with what the founding fathers were trying to achieve, knowing that there was significant burdens to interstate commerce before the Constitution, where states would impose duties, uh, even higher duties against other states than they imposed against foreign countries. One of the things that the framers of the Constitution were trying to prevent was exactly that. They recognized that there needed to be, for prosperity's sake, there needed to be free trade among the several states. And so while they were very jealous in guarding the rights of states to do it as they please, that's infused throughout all the Constitution. They were also equally careful that they did not want states to somehow tax interstate commerce and discourage it. So there was to be no hindrance of interstate commerce. And so Congress said, the framers said, that only Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce. Okay, so it was a very carefully crafted clause in there meant to encourage commerce, that was the key to prosperity. Um, it was so clear that this is the meaning of it that it evolved into what some people call the dormant or the negative commerce clause, meaning that not only was the right to regulate interstate commerce reserved to the Congress, but on the negative side, or on the dormant side, it basically said that no state can do something to impede interstate commerce. Okay, so very early on, 1824, it was very clear that no state could do anything to hinder interstate commerce by way of any kind of tax. That was the very early understanding. In fact, this is not like only in 1824, but as recently as 1992, the Supreme Court has reaffirmed that the Commerce Clause, in and of itself, by its own force, prohibits states from interfering with interstate commerce. Okay, so this is not such an ancient idea. So I'm going to introduce our pendulum to you. You're going to get maybe tired of this pendulum by the time we're done with this course, but I like to kind of keep our eyes on whether or not the Supreme Court is in favor of business or in favor of government. And you'll see over time that it seems to constantly, as it evolves in favor of government, maybe not too surprisingly. Maybe it's time for a poll question, Ashley.
Okay. Okay, votes are starting to come in. That's almost everybody, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and post the results.
All right, so I was doing my best to convince you that companies should not be forced to collect some other state's tax because their activities should be protected by the Due Process Clause and the Commerce Clause. Almost 90% of you at least somewhat agreed with that, and 11% don't agree at all. And that's okay. You know, these poll questions are just meant for interacting in some way. Plus, we have to have a recording of your interaction for CPE purposes. But it's interesting, I think, because as soon as the Constitution was ratified, it was well understood that no state could tax anything interstate commerce related. I'm going to show you some cases. But maybe if you realize that there's a sales tax and a use tax, this will give you the best indication. It was so well understood that anything interstate related could not be subject to sales tax that states enacted the use tax. Because otherwise, what you would do is simply buy things from across the state and you would never owe the sales tax because it had an interstate component to it. So states said, oh, okay, well, I may not be able to tax anything that is in interstate commerce, but I can tax it once it comes into my state and my citizen starts to use it. And that's what's called the use tax. That's why it's important to understand the difference between sales tax and use tax. Use tax, generally speaking, is a tax that on a transaction that has an interstate component, meaning it came from somewhere out of state. Sales tax is a tax on a transaction that occurs wholly within the borders of the state. So if you go and buy something and pick it up in your state, then sales tax applies. If you buy something from somebody out of state and it's shipped across state line, then use tax applies. It's possible that, so the question is, who has to collect that use tax? All right, once it's interstate in nature, then it's a use tax. And the question is, who can the state force to collect a use tax? But this has been my argument for a long time, that from the very beginning, states have had a use tax statute on their books. And really, in all this argument about Nexus and marketplace fairness and loopholes and evading the tax and fundamental fairness, really the federal government or the state government already has a tax on the books. They just lack the will. Now their argument is it's so difficult to collect it. And in my opinion, that's simply baloney, malarkey, right? That the state governments can't collect it. They just don't want to be the bad guy. They want to force the out-of-state company to have to collect their own use tax. So early on, at least, states knew that they could not tax anything with an interstate component. Well, this went to court over the years. All right, so Constitution ratified in late 1700s, 1824 was the last case we talked about. Now let's go ahead up to 1918. This is the first time the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a state government. And this is 1918, okay? So roughly 100 years ago, 95 years ago. And this will give you some idea of how much things have changed in a short amount of time. In this situation, U.S. Glue, based in Wisconsin, they had interstate sales, okay? They had customers outside of Wisconsin that bought their glue. On their state income tax return, so this is Wisconsin going after a Wisconsin company, okay, after their own in-state company. Because on the U.S. Glue income tax return, to the extent they had sales outside of Wisconsin, they were not including them in their apportionment factor in Wisconsin. They were throwing them out. So let's say they made 50% of their sales to Illinois, for example. They were only paying tax in Wisconsin on 50% of their income. And Wisconsin said, well, wait a minute. You can't do that. You owe all of your tax to us. Okay, so it's not that Illinois wanted to tax U.S. Glue. They knew they couldn't do that. That was an interstate transaction. It's that Wisconsin wanted to tax U.S. Glue. And so this was a groundbreaking case. And this is kind of shocking maybe to you as you think about it. So Wisconsin said, you need to apportion 100% of your income to Wisconsin. And the ruling was the U.S. Supreme Court said, yeah, we agree with that. Just because it's an interstate sale doesn't mean you can exclude it from your sales factor. Okay, so hopefully I've made that clear, or hopefully I didn't say it too many times. But the point I want to make there is it took over 100 years for a state to win this issue, that a domestic corporation, okay, domestic in this context, domestic versus foreign means an in-state company, okay, that's domestic. Foreign means out of state, okay. It took this long for the state to be able to tax a domestic company for income tax purposes on sales it made outside of its own state. All right, because to that point, everybody knew you can't even tax that for income tax purposes. So the Supreme Court said Wisconsin, who is applying a general income tax upon the gains of an in-state or domestic corporation, may include in the computation the net income derived from transactions in interstate commerce without contravening the Commerce Clause. So this was a groundbreaking case, but it's instructive in my opinion because to this point, there was no way a state could do that. Now, if you fast forward to today, that's quite a difference. This wouldn't even be a question today. Okay, so that was 1918. Let's move ahead to 1941. Here's Sears Roebuck. Now, this is a sales tax case. The last one was an income tax case. Sears Roebuck had a presence in Iowa, meaning they had a store, brick and mortar store in Iowa. They sold they conducted two types of businesses in Iowa. One was the normal, we ship inventory to Iowa. You come and look through the shelves. You decide what you want. You buy it. You put it in your grocery cart, and you buy it. They also had a catalog sales operation. And so they would send catalogs to people in Iowa. People would look in the catalog, say, oh, I really want this item, and they would send in that order. And that specific item would be fulfilled from New York, and it would be shipped specifically to that store in Iowa where the person would come and pick up that item. It was wholly an interstate transaction, okay, no question about it. Ordered across state lines, fulfilled from across state lines, etc. Sears Roebuck was collecting Iowa tax on its retail sales in Iowa. However, they knew that no tax was due on those interstate catalog orders. True, they were fulfilled from that same store, but it was a totally separate interstate transaction, in their opinion. Well, Iowa went after Sears Roebuck, and maybe not too surprisingly, the Supreme Court ruled, actually I think it was surprising at the time to us from our perspective today, this is a shocker that this even had to go before the court. But the Supreme Court said if you are a retailer maintaining a place of business in a state and you make sales of TPP for use in that state, so if you have basically a physical presence of a store in a state, then you've got to collect the tax imposed by that state. And this is a use tax, by the way, okay, because it was an interstate transaction. So this is probably the first time that it was ruled that on an interstate transaction that a company had a responsibility to collect the use tax for some other state. All right, 1941. That's not that long ago. Before that, there was no question that an interstate transaction simply was not the burden of that interstate seller. So initially, for the first, 170 years or so, 150 years or so, interstate transactions simply could not be taxed. And businesses did not have to worry themselves with that complication. Was it a loophole that they were getting away with? That's the way they cast it today, but it certainly was not. It's just a matter of, if you want to impose a tax on your own residents, more power to you. There's no burden on interstate commerce there. But once you force a non-resident retailer to collect that tax, that's a burden on interstate commerce. So starting in 1941, then the pendulum really swung to the states, because now Pandora's box is open, and things are going to go crazy. So now let's move ahead to 1959. This is the case that really rocked the estate tax world. This is Northwestern Cement in 1959. So here we are with Iowa again. But this time, Minnesota is going after an Iowa corporation. So remember, U.S. Glue was Wisconsin versus its own Wisconsin corporation, whether or not they had to apportion income to Wisconsin based on interstate activities. Well, here is Northwestern Cement, and they have a presence in Minnesota. In fact, they have a sales office that they lease from Minnesota, and they have sales reps in Minnesota. And Minnesota said, hey, if you think back to the Sears Roebuck case, you're maintaining a place of business in our state, and you're earning income. And yes, it's technically interstate in nature. However, we think you should pay Minnesota income tax. Northwestern Cement is saying, but wait a minute. We pay 100% of our income tax after U.S. Glue. We pay 100% of our income tax already in Iowa. So how are we going to owe income tax in Minnesota as well? So you would think maybe the Supreme Court would rule in favor of Northwestern Cement. They're already paying tax on 100% of their income. No, Minnesota won. And the Supreme Court said that the net income from interstate operations of a foreign corporation, Iowa is foreign to Minnesota, may be subjected to state taxation. All right, this is a groundbreaking case with these provisos. One, that the levy is not discriminatory, and two, that it's properly apportioned to local activities within the state, forming sufficient nexus to support the same. All right, so hopefully in the context of the history of interstate taxation, you get a sense of what a groundbreaking case this was and how shocking it was to business. And there was a huge reaction to this case because, wait a minute, we've been paying 100% of our income tax in our home state after the U.S. Glue case. Now we've got this case, which means that we're going to have a whole bunch of different state income taxes to pay as well. These laws are not uniform. They're different from state to state. We're going to have a whole new level of compliance we have to worry about. Furthermore, this is a Supreme Court case, not a ruling, not a law, and so there's no regulations to give us guidance. What does it mean to be properly apportioned? How are we supposed to even interpret this? And this sufficient nexus. What's this all about? All right, so we've been having this great discussion of nexus, and we really even haven't defined it yet, because I was waiting for this case to define it for you. The term nexus, it's a Supreme Court contrivance. As far as I can tell in my research on it, it's used as far back as 1940, because what the Supreme Court is trying to do is decipher where is that line when a interstate transaction can be taxed without violating the Constitution. And so they said it's got to be something related to your connection with that state. So that's where this term nexus comes from. It's basically, what is the minimum connection you must have with the state, or the state must have with you, to impose tax obligations. People don't like when I say force, but that's really at the point of a gun, the threat of jail. When can a state force you to do their bidding? That's really what it comes down to. Now, if business reaction was super negative, what do you think congressional reaction was to this Supreme Court? It might surprise you to know that congressional reaction was also very negative to this case, because it allows something that the Congress did not think was permissible, which was limits on interstate commerce. They're worried about this type of hindrance limiting job creation and growth. There was another big concern. I mean, this is a court case that said, yes, it's fine. It wasn't fine until this point, but nobody ever asked us. But we don't see a problem with states imposing an income tax on interstate activities. So they didn't. It's not a new law where it has an effective date. It's a court case, and so this would open up all prior years. You would think. So people are not only worried about going forward, they're worried about states coming back and assessing them for prior years' exposure. That case is what gave rise to Public Law 86-272. Public Law 86-272 is came out in the 86th Congress, which was 1959. All right. It was enacted within 7 months of the Northwestern Cement decision. It was, when you read the law, you'll see that it specifically, without mentioning Northwestern Cement, specifically overturns it. Okay? It was meant to be a temporary solution. I imagine it's just like we hear today that let's just pass something until we can pass broader, more comprehensive reform. That's the type of language I imagine that they used. They couldn't get enough votes to really do something very sweeping, but there was enough support cobbled together to at least overturn Public Law 86, to overturn Northwestern Cement. So that temporary solution has been the law since 1959. So to me, it's important. Sometimes people get confused with that Public Law 86 in there, and they'll think that it's relatively recent. No, Public Law 86-272 has been on the books since 1959. Here is what it says. There's not much. You could read the whole law in just a few minutes, probably. But here's some important points from it. It says, no state or political subdivision thereof shall have power to impose a net income tax on a business if all they do in that state is either of the following: the solicitation of orders for sales of tangible personal property, which orders are sent outside the state for approval, and if approved, are filled from outside the state as well. So here's the two important things about Public Law 86-272. It's a protection against not all taxes. It's only a protection against the tax that was involved in that Northwestern Cement case, which was a net income tax by Minnesota. So that's why in this law, it's very specific that no state may impose a net income tax on you if all you do is what Northwestern Cement was doing, which was soliciting, I got it, orders of tangible personal property, cement, tangible personal property. Remember, they had salespeople in Minnesota, and they had those orders were sent outside the state for approval. So the law very, very specifically, but has very, very specific restraints on it as well. So, in my opinion, now with in viewing congressional swift reaction to this Northwestern Cement case, I think I could say that in 1959 anyway, the pendulum swings back to business. All right. Let's ask this poll question about what was Congress really intending with Public Law 86-272. Was there a message or not?
Okay, just about everybody has voted. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Okay, so most of you agree. So I did a good job of convincing many of you that I think, at least I think it's plausible that Congress was trying to send a very strong message that, hey, wait a minute, interstate commerce is under our purview. We regulate it. And if we decide not to regulate it, then no state can hinder it. And you, Supreme Court, you're way out of line. You have no business opening this floodgate to taxation of interstate commerce. I think it was a very strong message. I don't know how many times the Supreme Court is specifically overruled by a law in so short a time right after they issued this opinion. But do you think that deterred the states or that it deterred the Supreme Court? Is a signal like that enough? States go on the offensive because when they look at Public Law 6272, they realize, wow, it only applies to a very small set of facts. It has to be a net income tax, first of all, has nothing to do with sales tax. And second of all, it only applies if your only activities in the state are solicitation or something right close to solicitation. Um, so, it's a law. We've got to listen to it, but let's press forward on this. What about the Supreme Court? Do they get the message that I say Congress is sending, which is back off? This is our area. If we want to pass a law, we'll pass a law. If we don't, then, no touch. Well, that was 1959, right? Let's go all the way to 1960. I mean, the very next year. Scripto, the maker of pens, located in Georgia with no place of business in Florida, but they had 10 independent, non employee salespeople soliciting sales of pens in Florida. Okay. Florida said, Scripto, you should have collected sales tax. You didn't. All right, can Scripto fall back on Public Law 86272 at this point? No, because Public Law 86272 is about net income taxes. They met every other case because they were selling tangible personal property, but Public Law 86272 is only in income tax protection. However, they don't even have employees or any kind of office in Florida. So what will the Supreme Court say? Will they take their lesson from Congress, who said don't mess with interstate commerce? Well, no. In fact, so right after Public Law 272 was passed, this case comes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, yeah, that's enough nexus. That's enough connection with the state, independent sales reps. It's not whether they're independent or employees. The test is, what are they doing in the state? They said, to CPAs, this distinction between employee versus contractor is really a big deal. Independent, because it bears on whether or not the company owes payroll taxes or not. But the Supreme Court said, no, it doesn't matter to us whether they're employees of yours or they're just independent brokers. That is a fine distinction, but it has no constitutional significance. And so they said, yes, independent sales reps is enough to create nexus. So where do you say the pendulum is now? Okay, we're going to get whiplash because in such a short order, you would have thought that with the Supreme Court getting slapped back so hard by the Congress, that they would not rule this way. But no, they continue this trend to ruling in favor of the states right after Public Law 6272, which does what for the states? Well, they are emboldened. And so they start to think about what other activities, if independent sales reps is enough, what else creates Nexus? So if they have non-employees in the state conducting activities on their behalf, what other companies are vulnerable now? Well, they thought about people who sell over the catalog. And what about, those companies have all kinds of, maybe they're not employees, but they're independent reps by making deliveries. All right, so that takes us to 1967. This is a case that a lot of people talk about when it comes to sales tax nexus. It's National Bellis Hess. Bellis Hess fits in this profile of a lot of activity in foreign states. But they did not, so this case, it's a Missouri corporation. Illinois says, Bellis Hess, you should have collected our use tax. Bellis Hess says, hey, we don't have employees in your state. We don't have offices in your state. We don't have inventory in your state. We have nothing in your state. The only thing we do is make deliveries, but those deliveries are made by U.S. mail. So those people do not work for us. They don't represent us. They just make deliveries. What would the Supreme Court do? They just said that 10 independent sales reps are enough, and there's no distinction. That distinction is without constitutional significance. So what did the Supreme Court do in this case? We're only 7 years out from Scripto. Well, somewhat shockingly, in this case, the Supreme Court ruled actually in favor of the business. And they said that mail order connection is not sufficient, that there has to be something more than a mail order connection. Now, can you start to see why people get confused? Okay, there's no bright line test. The Supreme Court just rules on cases that come before it almost seemingly on a whim. I'm drawing this narrative, but I'm not telling you that the Supreme Court followed it exactly a narrative like I'm saying. It's just this is how things evolve. In this case, the court said, hey, the Constitution says we want to have a national economy free from these entanglements. We want to encourage commerce. So by making deliveries through the Postal Service, that's too much. That's if you try to tax that, that's where the Congress has to act. If the Congress wants to say that's enough connection with the state, then they can, but we will not do that. So now I ask you, where do you think the pendulum is after we get Bellis Hess? So Ashley?
Answers are coming in quick for this one. That's just about everyone, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and post those results.
All right, had enough time to look at those results. All right, interesting. 3/4 of you say it's with businesses. So that was a trick question. In my opinion, and I know that a lot of businesses cite Bellis Hess and Quill, which we'll still talk about later, as concrete proof that Nexus laws are businesses just can't have Nexus unless they have a really strong physical presence. But if you really look at it, and if you're a state government, you look at Bellis Hess, you say, in Public Law 6272, and you think about Scripto, the Supreme Court in Bellis Hess carved out a really, it's almost like an outlier if you're the state government. And you would say, well, Bellis Hess is kind of a weird case because if you look at all the other cases, it seemed like they're always ruling in favor of the government. So, all right, we have to abide by Bellis Hess, but only in those very limited circumstances. If their only activity in the state is using the Postal Service to make deliveries, then we can't assert nexus in that case. But how many people are just like that? So the pendulum really, I think, is still with the states here. Now that gives me a chance to branch off into another case that I want to cover. Because let's say you are a common carrier yourself, and your entire business, all your income is generated by interstate commerce. Seemingly then, you could make the argument that no state can tax me. I should be immune from taxation because all I do is carry stuff between states. And that was the situation with Complete Auto Transit in 1977. So we move ahead 10 more years. Their whole business was transporting cars for dealers, from the manufacturer to the dealers. So the fact is they had Nexus. I mean, they had connection with all the states where they transported vehicles. No question about it. But where did they owe income tax? In this case, Missouri assessed their income tax against Complete Auto Transit, and Missouri won. Because Missouri was just trying to tax a certain portion of their income. They weren't trying to tax it all. And so this is where I think the Supreme Court viewed this as the seminal case on interstate taxation at the time. They labored to create the famous four-pronged test in which a bunch of tests of whether or not a state tax does not violate the Commerce Clause. And here were the four prongs. One, as long as that income tax is applied to an activity, well, it's really an income tax or sales tax, is applied to an activity with substantial nexus with the taxing state. So they put that modifier of substantial nexus. As long as the tax is fairly apportioned and it does not discriminate against interstate commerce. So the test of whether or not a tax discriminates against interstate commerce is, does that tax an interstate company more than it would tax an intrastate company? That's how you decide whether or not it discriminates against interstate commerce. And finally, and this prong has turned out to be, through subsequent cases, turned out to be not very important at all. But as long as it is fairly related to services provided by the state. Really, it takes very little service provided by a state to justify the tax under Complete Auto Transit. But there now you're up to speed on this case, the Complete Auto Transit case. I think what it really says is, as of 1977, we have finally put to rest what has really been the law for 100 plus years, that just because a tax or an activity is interstate in nature, you can't use that as your bulletproof defense, okay? That would not be enough to defeat a tax. So this constant evolution is really going in the way of the states, but it gets worse. Thinking back to Scripto was not overturned in that Bellis Hess case. It was not addressed at all. And Scripto said 10 independent sales reps gives you nexus. Now, I ask you, what about one? Is one independent sales rep enough to give you nexus? I bring you Tyler Pipe now, 1987, so we're now 10 years up from Complete Auto. Here is a company headquartered in Tyler, Texas. They have no property, no offices, no employees. Does that sound familiar? In Washington. But Washington assessed them their B&O tax. And in this case, the Supreme Court agreed with Washington. They only had one independent sales rep in Washington, and they said that was enough activity to create Nexus. This was an independent broker, not even exclusive to Tyler Pipe. It was certainly not an employee, and of course we knew that from Scripto that was not going to be a protection. But you would think, is one enough? You would think that would be de minimis. But they said if that one salesperson is significantly associated with the taxpayer's ability to establish and maintain a market in the state, whatever that means, okay, we don't know exactly how you draw that line. Okay, I have a sales rep there. However, I don't think he's significantly associated with my ability to establish and maintain a market. So I don't know where you draw that line, but one, in Tyler Pipe's case, this is a U.S. Supreme Court case, one independent sales rep was enough to create Nexus in Washington. And since it's a U.S. Supreme Court case, obviously it's not, you don't just apply it in Washington, it applies nationwide. So here we go again. The pendulum, if I could move the pendulum even more to the states, I would. It hasn't spent hardly any time on the side of business. It's spending more and more time and more locked over in the side of the state government. So, what are some activities that create Nexus? Well, obviously, buildings or property or employees in the state, just about everybody knows those are Nexus creating activities. Activities of independent sales reps, that's the one that kind of surprises people. They don't want to believe that one. And that's why I've kind of harped it on a little bit, because it's very common for companies to use independent sales reps. And people don't think of that as a Nexus creating activity. Independent sales reps, independent contractors, renting property in another state or leasing property to another that goes into that state, making deliveries in your own vehicle is a Nexus creating activity. Those are the common ones. If you conduct those activities in any state, you likely have Nexus. But there are other activities. Let's say you don't conduct any of those activities, but you do some other activities. And so there is other ones that specific states have said, well, this activity creates Nexus. And so, for example, here is a list of state-specific activities. And I have this as a download that Ashley can give to you. But here are some activities that you might conduct in a state that kind of are more on a state-specific basis. For example, attending trade shows is kind of a touchy issue. There's 3 different ways you can attend a trade show. Think about it. There's probably more, but 3 basic ways. One would be you're there strictly as a interested observer. You're just there to see what's available at the show. You want to go to Comdex and see what cool electronic gadgets there are. Is that enough to create Nexus? You're in the state. Most states would say, no, that's not enough Nexus. That's not enough connection. And if you think about it, it probably is enough connection under the Supreme Court, but states, maybe their Department of Revenue would love to tax you based on that, but the Chamber of Commerce is going to say, are you out of your mind? We want people to come. They bring a lot of economic benefit coming to our trade shows. So if they know that the Department of Revenue is going to get a list of everyone that came to our trade shows, then they're never going to come to our state again. So there's many states have a specific carve out just if all you do is attend a trade show. But what if you're attending a trade show as an exhibitor And there's two different ways you can do it as an exhibitor. Maybe all you're doing is exhibiting. You're not selling anything. So some states have specific treatment if all you do is exhibit, but you don't sell. And then finally, if you do sell, that's the most likely way that they're gonna force you to collect the tax. Okay, you're in their state, you're selling stuff, then a lot of states will make you register for that purpose. Maybe temporarily register, but register nonetheless. Did you know that some states say that advertising in local media is enough to create Nexus? In some cases, having an in-state bank account is enough. Licensing intellectual property that people use, like a trademark, for example, can be a Nexus creating activity in some states. And then, there's these others, storing data on servers located in the state. So think about how complicated that is. Whether or not an affiliate of yours, a related entity, your brother sister corporation, whether or not strictly because of your corporate affiliation that you would have Nexus. What about so-called click-through relationships? All right, so we talked about that one independent sales rep or 10 independent sales reps can give you Nexus. What if you have 1,000 quote-unquote independent sales reps that are sending you business to your website? Is that creating Nexus? And that's really the position that New York took against Amazon. Amazon, not a client of ours, so what I share with you is publicly available information. But Amazon has conducted business for years using affiliate click-through activities, meaning I'm a blogger in New York. I write about some cool gadget I use or a great book I read. I put a link in my blog that links back to Amazon. When you read my blog, you say, hey, that Andy, he's got an interesting opinion. I think I'll buy that thing. Well, I get registered with Amazon, and they will pay me a commission on sales that get consummated through my link. Well, New York said, hey, wait a minute. That's just like Scripto and just like Tyler Pipe. It's even worse. You got a whole bunch of those people selling on Amazon's behalf in New York. We think by the virtue of that activity, Amazon has Nexus in New York. Well, they fought it, but they lost. And that's really, to me, when this whole thing broke apart for Amazon. And you see Amazon now even has done a full 180 on this in their arguments. They have said steadfastly over the years that they have no Nexus. They are not required. They're just like Bellis Hess. They're not required to collect tax. It's way too complicated. It's an impedance of interstate commerce. They've used all the arguments that I've made so far. Well, when New York got them, I think their reaction was, this is going to be really hard for us to win. If we lose the Nexus argument, we have exposure, who knows how much, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars of exposure in the past. And so what Amazon has been trying to do is strike agreements with states to start collecting the tax going forward. At this point, Amazon, in my opinion, would be very happy to collect the tax. In fact, they already have the systems to do it. Their argument was, on the one hand, that it's so complicated we can't do this. It's impeding interstate commerce. But on the other hand, they were saying to every affiliate out there, hey, if you want to use us to collect the tax, all you got to do is check the box, and we'll automatically collect the tax for you. So that argument really rung hollow. They had independent sales reps all over the place, so that argument was getting weak. Their big exposure was the back taxes. So they've been trying to strike agreements. States would be thrilled to have Amazon start collecting the tax, in my opinion. But there's this really tough conundrum there of if we allow Amazon to just come in and start collecting tax and not collect the back tax from them, then what standing do we have to collect back tax from everybody else in the same situation? So that's why we're at such an impasse, and that's why you see Amazon, in my opinion, advocating for the passage of a federal bill, this Marketplace Fairness Act or something along those lines. That's why these big retailers now, Walmart, Best Buy, Amazon, all advocating for passage of this federal law. It's all because this whole issue of whether independent sales reps give you Nexus. So what about, so that just gives you some ideas about whether or not click-through relationships create Nexus. What if you attend a seminar? Some states would say that's enough to create Nexus. Another real big gotcha for companies who conduct business this way is this drop shipping. You know, you're an online seller and you advertise your products. People come onto your site and say that's a really cool thing, and you don't maintain your own inventory. You just market products and then you have it drop shipped to your customer once they buy it. You never have to handle it. Well, does that company that drop ships for you, they're acting in your behalf, they're fulfilling for you, they're maintaining inventory for you. Is that activity enough to create Nexus? A lot of states say yes, it is. So drop shipping is a really complicated situation when it comes to Nexus. So in all these are kind of like your state specific. I gave you the ones that create Nexus everywhere. These activities create Nexus some places. It depends on state law. Depends what they're trying to accomplish. All right, so that's how we get to where we are so far. All right, so now I want to get back to the mattress company. I'm getting close to wrapping up, I think, yes. I want to revisit the mattress company situation. And before I do, I want to ask a poll question. I hear Ashley talking over there, so I don't know if she's got poll question ready or not. Ashley, you ready for poll question? Okay, I see you're running to her office. Good, good. The question is, if you think back to the mattress company, remember they sell mattresses from Oregon into Washington. They've come to you to give them advice. They have followed Amazon, who has said, Amazon saying, I don't have Nexus, I don't have to collect sales tax. They want to be just like Amazon. They've come to you, you're their advisor. What would you advise them to do?
Answers are still trickling in.
A lot of thought going into this one. What should we do?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it and share the results.
All right, so you are the advisor, and you know that Amazon doesn't collect sales tax. You now know about Bellis Hess, but you also know about these other cases. Based on what you know, and you're also sympathetic to your client, um, you want to give them the best answer you possibly can. You know Amazon doesn't collect tax, so why would Mattress World have to collect tax? All right, so 48% of you said your advice to them was yes, collect a tax because states are going to assert they have enough presence. 17% said no, you don't have enough physical presence. And then 35% of you said not enough information. Okay. So here's what you're thinking about in trying to make this, give them this advice. Since when can Washington, they didn't have any sales reps in Washington, all right, so we know that sales reps create Nexus, but uh, the the mattress world did not have any sales reps. Since when can Washington do this? Maybe your question is, so those of you who said there's not enough information yet, maybe I agree with you. Does making deliveries in your own trucks create Nexus? I've told you now that there were no independent sales reps. Maybe you didn't know that before. Maybe they conduct some other activities, all right? But if you're trying to help out your client here, the question is, should they be paying that tax in Washington? Well, I'm going to agree with, I want to agree with those of you who say there's not enough physical presence because I want to err on the side of the client. Or you could make the argument, I want to help the client by not giving them false hope, because you could give them the wrong answer and then they get assessed the tax and then they can't collect it from their customers and then they go out of business. So are you really helping your client by telling them, no, you don't have Nexus? But on the other hand, you really don't know enough information. I will tell you that they're making deliveries in their own trucks, okay? Because the Postal Service, this is what I assume, because the Postal Service doesn't make deliveries of mattresses. It's too big. They would probably love to make deliveries in someone else's truck, but on the other hand, they don't deliver big stuff like that. And second of all, maybe they want to advertise on their own trucks. So if they could paint a big picture of Mattress World on the side of the truck and say, hey, if you buy a mattress from us, you don't owe any sales tax in Washington, kind of thumb their noses at the state while they make their own deliveries. Well, they make deliveries in their own truck. So is that enough to create Nexus? And so here's why I ask you. Since if making deliveries in your own vehicles create Nexus, why? Why, if that's how you decided, why can a state say if you use a third party to make deliveries like the Postal Service, that doesn't create Nexus? But if you're using your own truck, is it because you're advertising on your truck? I mean, let's say you make 5 deliveries in your own truck and 5,000 deliveries using the Postal Service. Who is using the roads more? The one using the Postal Service or you using your own truck? Who's using the services of the police and the fire department, etc.? Well, clearly the one that makes deliveries via the Postal Service. So why would there be a distinction for deliveries in your own trucks? Well, we're going to talk about that more in our next class. We're going to arm you with enough information so that you can make this decision, you give your advice with full confidence. That's part 2. So we've covered a whole bunch of cases today, leading up to the last one that I really want to spend some time on, which is the Quill decision. Quill is a very important case. It came out in 1992. It's the last case that the Supreme Court has issued on Nexus for sales tax purposes. They've never taken another case. They've put it squarely in the hands of the Congress, who has yet to act. So I'm going to go over with you in this case what the state Supreme Court ruled in Quill, and then what the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in connection with Quill as well, and show you how those contrast and why it's so important. And then we're going to talk about how much does Quill really protect us. because we're going to start to see with Quill that there's going to be a divergence of Nexus standards for income tax versus sales tax. There's going to be some differences that emerge. And I'm going to show you why it's even more complicated today because of Quill than it ever was in the past. So we've got a lot to cover next time around. So far, you have hopefully a really good background on how we got to the point where Quill was issued. And after our class next time, hopefully you'll be really solid on Nexus in general. So with that, I'll wrap it, Ashley, and pass the microphone back to you.
Thanks, Andy. By now, I know that you are all familiar with our website, but check out PeisnerJohnson.com for other webinars. We do cover some other topics. We also have a state and local tax newsletter that you can sign up for. A lot of you have downloaded some of the charts and the lists that I've posted links to. We have a variety of charts and white papers on other topics that you may also be interested in. Just as a little FYI. Before we wrap up today, I am going to share a couple more links with you. First is how to download your CPE certificate for those of you who are interested in that. So I'm sharing that in the GoToWebinar control panel. I'm also going to post a download link to the slides. I know some of you have emailed me and already requested that, but in case you didn't get a copy of the slides and you would like those, I'm posting a link there. After you download the slides and the certificates, exit the GoToWebinar control panel, and you'll have an opportunity to share any questions or other feedback, any topics you'd like to see covered in our next session. So thank you for your feedback there. Andy and I will stay online for a few more minutes to answer questions, but this concludes part 1 of our webinar. I look forward to seeing you all on Thursday. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.